everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be breaking down a brand new paper from Dr. Souza's lab located right here in Tampa, Florida, which was published in the International Journal of Sports Medicine. The paper is titled "Don't Sweat the Swelling, Exercise Volumes, Transient Effects in Trained Males." Now, this study tackles a question that comes up constantly both in research and in practice, and the question is, when we increase training volume within a single session, are we actually creating more muscle growth stimulus, or are we just seeing short-term swelling that disappears within a day or two? And part 2, is this swelling being confused for muscle growth, particularly within the volume literature? So why does this question even matter? Well, it matters because many hypertrophy studies rely on ultrasound measurements taken shortly after training, and if swelling or edema is still present, that could inflate estimates of muscle growth. So this paper directly examines that issue in a group of trained lifters. So let's take a look at some background. Resistance training volume is widely considered a key driver of muscle hypertrophy, and previous work suggests somewhat of a dose-response relationship where higher volumes tend to produce greater gains. However, what we found is that the relationship is not perfectly linear. Instead, it appears to follow a logarithmic pattern, where increases in volume lead to diminishing returns and eventually reach a ceiling. One challenge in interpreting both acute and longitudinal hypertrophy studies is that short-term increases in muscle size and training may reflect fluid shifts rather than true structural changes. So, two phenomena are often discussed here: acute muscle swelling, which is typically short-lived and related to blood flow and metabolite accumulation, and exercise-induced muscle damage, which is associated with inflammation and edema and may persist for several days after hard exercise. Importantly, ultrasound muscle thickness measurements cannot distinguish between these two mechanisms in the acute setting. Instead, the time course of the response becomes critical. Swelling is generally expected to resolve within 24 hours, while edema related to muscle damage can persist for up to 42 to 72 hours. Now, trained individuals can complicate this even further. Due to their repeated bout effect, they tend to experience attenuated muscle damage responses compared to untrained individuals. Despite this, no prior study has systematically examined how different per-session training volumes, defined by the number of sets, influences things like swelling and muscle damage markers across multiple post-exercise time points in trained lifters. So that gap is what this study aimed to address. The researchers used a randomized counterbalance crossover design. 13 resistance-trained men participated, each with over 5 years of training experience and a back squat strength that's roughly 1.6 times their body mass. Each participant completed 3 separate experimental sessions, spaced 1 week apart. The only variable manipulated was the number of sets performed at each session. Each participant completed 3 separate lower body resistance training sessions. The exercises used in all the sessions were the barbell back squat, the leg press, and the seated knee extension. Now, in the lowest volume condition, participants completed 3 sets of back squats, 2 sets of leg press, and 2 sets of knee extension, for a total of 7 sets. In the moderate volume condition, participants performed 6 sets of back squats, 4 sets of leg press, and 4 sets of knee extension, resulting in 14 total sets. And in the highest volume condition, participants completed 9 sets of back squats, 6 sets of leg press, and 6 sets of knee extension, for a total of 21 total sets. Participants were instructed to complete between 8 and 10 reps per set, and the load was reduced if necessary to remain within that rep range. Rest periods were standardized to 2 minutes between sets and 3 minutes between exercises. Range of motion was standardized across all exercises, while individual technique and stance were otherwise left unchanged to reflect habitual lifting patterns. The researchers assessed perceptual, performance, and morphological outcomes. In English, this means that rate of perceived exertion was recorded immediately after each training session, while the participant's own perceived recovery status was also measured at baseline and again at 24, 48, and 72 hours post-exercise. Performance was assessed using a 10 rep max volume load during the back squat, which was tested at baseline and again each post-exercise time point. Muscle morphology was assessed using ultrasound to measure muscle thickness of the anterior thigh, including both the rectus femoris and vastus intermedius at the proximal and distal measurement sites. Echo intensity, which uses lightness and darkness of ultrasound images to detect swelling, was also assessed at the sites as an indirect marker of muscle edema. Ultrasound measurements were taken at baseline, immediately after exercise, and each follow-up time point. And as you can see, I've included a graph on screen to help illustrate all the key time points for this study. Now, before we dive into the results, I want to take a quick moment to mention my evidence-based app BeAFit. BeAFit is designed to take the science we talk about here, things like training volume, your recovery, progression, and nutrition, and turn it into a clear, practical guidance that you can actually apply. It includes hundreds of workouts for all experience levels and training goals, from hypertrophy and strength to cardio, warm-ups, and mobility. No guesswork, no trends, just structured programs, education, and tools grounded in research. If you'd like help implementing this information in a way that fits real life, then BeAFit is the perfect platform to support your training. Now, let's get back to the results. So, not surprisingly, doing more total sets made the workouts feel harder. Participants rated the highest volume sessions as the most difficult, followed by the moderate volume sessions, with the lowest volume sessions feeling the least demanding. Perceived recovery status declined following all training sessions and remained below baseline values through to 72 hours post-exercise. Recovery was consistently rated as poor following the highest volume condition, particularly at the 24 and 48-hour time points. By 72 hours, differences between conditions were no longer observed, although recovery ratings had not fully returned to baseline. Despite these differences in perceived effort and recovery, the participants' 10 rep max performance was not negatively affected by any training condition. In fact, participants demonstrated greater squat volume load during post-exercise testing compared to baseline, and no impairments in performance were observed at any time point following any of the volume conditions. Moving on to muscle thickness and echo intensity. Muscle thickness increased immediately after exercise in all three training conditions. However, these increases were transient and returned to baseline within 24 hours, regardless of whether participants performed 7, 14, or 21 sets. There were also no significant differences between volume conditions at any post-exercise time point. Echo intensity followed a similar pattern, increasing immediately after exercise and returning to baseline within 24 hours across all conditions. Importantly, no condition by time interactions were observed for either muscle thickness or echo intensity, indicating that higher training volumes did not prolong swelling or increase markers associated with muscle damage. The primary finding of this study is that in resistance-trained individuals, even very high single-session training volumes produced only short-lived increases in muscle thickness that resolved within 24 hours. These changes appear to reflect acute swelling rather than prolonged edema associated with muscle damage. Moreover, the absence of prolonged changes in echo intensity findings further supports this interpretation. These findings are likely influenced by the training status of the participants. Trained individuals typically exhibit a repeated bout effect, which attenuates muscle damage and the inflammatory response following resistance exercise. As a result, increasing volume within a single session may increase one's perceived effort and delay subjective recovery, without producing sustained morphological changes in skeletal muscle. Now, it's important to note that this study was acute in nature and was not designed to assess long-term hypertrophy. Additionally, the sample size was relatively small and the protocol focused exclusively on lower body exercises in young resistance-trained men. Therefore, these results may not be generalized to untrained individuals or other muscle groups or training protocols specifically designed to maximize muscle damage. Now, moving on to some of my thoughts. This study is particularly interesting because it provides a strong starting point for thinking about how acute swelling may or may not influence interpretations of hypertrophy research in trained individuals. At the same time, its scope is still limited to a single training session, so we cannot conclude that repeated exposure to very high volume sessions, such as 3 high volume workouts within 1 week, would produce the same transient response without prolonged swelling. And importantly, even if acute swelling is not a major confounder in trained lifters, this still leaves a rather another open question within the volume literature. Several longitudinal studies have reported extraordinarily large magnitudes of muscle growth with higher training volumes. If swelling was not influencing these measurements, then it's possible that the observed hypertrophy may truly have been substantial. Alternatively, and this is the interpretation I personally lean towards, these findings may reflect other methodological factors, such as measurement timing, tissue site selection, statistical handling, or sample characteristics. As a result, the study helps narrow out one possible explanation, but it does not fully resolve why some volume studies report such robust hypertrophy responses. That question, it seems, remains open for another day. So what can we take away from this study? Well, in trained lifters, higher per-session training volumes increased perceived exertion and slows subjective recovery, but it does not impair short-term performance. Acute increases in muscle thickness occur immediately after training, but resolve within 24 hours even following single very high-volume 21-set sessions. These findings suggest that muscle thickness measurements obtained 24 hours or more after training sessions are unlikely to be meaningfully influenced by residual swelling in trained individuals. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and if you've enjoyed watching this video, please be sure to give it a like, and if you want more evidence-based breakdowns that focus on research, their methods, results, and real-world interpretations, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I'll continue to dig into the details behind training volume, hypertrophy, and performance so you can better understand what the research actually shows. Thanks again, and I'll see you in my next video.